Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm beyond excited today. I am Rachelle Yeingst. I'm coming to you from JBF Consulting. And with me today, I have Thomas Deakins. And Thomas has an extensive background in supply chain and logistics technologies. He also has a strong background in academics and supply chain. Thomas, I don't want to hijack your introduction. Do you want to say hi to the group?
Yeah, hello everyone, and Rochelle, great to see you, and excited to be here. And as you said, I'm going to date myself, but 30 years of experience in supply chain with big emphasis on that of supply chain tech. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Tennessee in the Haslam College of Business and Department of Supply Chain, where I teach in the undergrad and graduate programs specifically about supply chain technology.
We're happy to have you. And so you and I had met prior to this, obviously, to define what we wanted to talk about today. And when I came to the table originally, I was very selfishly coming to the table because there was a topic that came up for me that I just thought you and I would have a great conversation on. And the topic's AI, but more specifically, the topic that really drove, I think, the themes that we want to touch on today is talking about the adoption and the incorporation of AI in everyday life and what is the new entry level going to look like? And then ultimately, what are we seeing in the marketplace from a tech perspective? And how can buyers actually weed through what's being marketed versus what is reality? But in order to even get to that endpoint, I think we just need to embrace and acknowledge AI is going to be part of our everyday life. And what I found very interesting in conversations with you is actually stems from your educational background. So you and I had conversations about supply chain students and how you're adopting AI within your curriculum. So is that something that we can touch on first before we kind of broaden this out into the technology landscape?
Yeah, happy to, and thanks for bringing that up. What I'm seeing is different universities and colleges. Everybody's talking about AI. It's obviously for a long time the conversations were, hey, how do we keep students from using AI to do their work and write the papers and things like that. And it's really and you laugh about that, but unfortunately it happens. And so that's why there are policies specific that you put in your syllabus as a professor, and you say, I'm either going to allow AI or I'm not, or I've got a moderate use of it, or whatever the case may be. I allow AI in my classes because I teach it. And the other thing that I put in there is you have to cite your source. It doesn't matter, think back to when you were in school, right? Even all the way back to high school when you were doing research papers. You were taught cite your sources. And that's the same thing that I tell students now. Use AI. So, for instance, if you're using Chat GPT or you're using any of the other Gen AI tools, make sure that you're citing your sources. It's no different than you going across the street, going to the library and pulling a book out and pulling something from that book. You've got to cite your source. Now, what I am seeing with students is this past semester in the fall, I taught a class on how to implement a transportation management system. And so we had some fun with AI because what we did is we gave them large data files and said, I need you to find the anomalies in the data. And they all struggled to find that because I gave them like 10,000 lines of data, right? And told them they had 2 or 3 minutes to do this. But then after we went back, we showed them, hey, you could have, loaded this into Chat GPT, for instance, and you could have said, hey, find things that are not cities in the United States. And just, really what that gets into is prompt engineering. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. What I'm finding is that most people, including probably the listeners on this webinar, probably the majority of people use AI like they would Google. If I type in something in Google in the search bar and I'm asking it a question, that's usually how people are using AI, especially Gen AI. And so if we can really understand how to use Gen AI from a prompt engineering standpoint, then we can truly get more out of the data. And so that's kind of where we're
Yeah. And I'm just interested to know from your perspective. So, AI is obviously a big part of our day to day lives, but taking AI out of the picture, if you had a class and you were teaching them how to implement a TMS prior to AI, was it that you had them actually combing through this data and you're teaching them what is an anomaly? What are you looking for? What is exceptional? Whereas now they have tools available that could help and you provide guidance, or what is that dynamic like?
Yeah, so I think it's more about just exposing them to, if you go back to that example, it's exposing them to all the types of data that a TMS would need, for instance,
Yeah.
right? So it's locations, addresses, items, et cetera, rates, the whole thing. But then it's saying, how can I compile that data easier? And most importantly, how can I make sure that that data is correct? Right.
Yeah.
So I purposely would give them files and say, hey, here's a rate file that is, it's very easy. It's a city to city rate. I would misspell that on purpose so that when they loaded it in the TMS and they try to do a rate inquiry, and they type in, Knoxville to Dallas, and Dallas is not spelled right when they loaded the data in, and they're trying to say Dallas in their query, well, it's not going to come back with anything. So we're trying to teach how they could actually use that to find the data that is wrong. And so, and that's just one way. And then we can get into more specifics of how we go more granular.
Yeah. Would it be safe to say that one of the core focuses for the next generation of supply chain and logistics is the ability to critically think? So they have all of these tools available to them, but that doesn't replace the need to critically understand or critically think, but then also actually interpret and then ingest that data right into their day to day processes. They need to know how to make those changes. So, is that the focus of entry level these days, as opposed to many of us who've been in logistics long term think of entry level as I was appointment scheduling. I was
Yeah,
calling,
right.
certain DC scheduling appointments and I was following up with carriers. And a lot of the technologies these days, that's standard AI or not, it's standard within the tool. So we're kind of shifting what entry level looks like. I'm just curious what your perspective on what is that true entry level today.
Yeah, it's completely shifted. You're right, Rochelle. And I think the big thing, what I tell students right now is this: you're going to school and you're majoring in supply chain for a reason. And it's because it's either that's your passion or that's where you think your job's going to be, or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
And it's usually all the above, because supply chain usually has a higher acceptance rate in regard to finding that first job than most of the majors. The second piece of that I tell them is, look, you you have to become the expert of your domain. And the reason you have to do that is because once you go into your role out as a logistics, as a supply chain practitioner, you have to become that expert in what you're doing and understanding the supply chain flows or whatever it is you're doing within your company. Then you have to start looking at it saying, okay, let me identify where those processes are that might be manual today, or something is I could do better using AI. And
Mhm.
so the whole idea, if we go back and start thinking about what we've been told for the last, what, 12 months, and this stuff changes constantly. Originally, it was, oh my gosh, AI is going to take everybody's job. Then it was, no, AI is going to just take data entry jobs. And then it's, hey, it's going to make us more efficient. And then I think where we're at now is we're trying to tell people, hey, embrace AI, become the expert in your domain, and then leverage AI to help you make better decisions, to be more efficient, work smarter, not harder, and then allow you to be able to go do other things that you never could have done. And I think if
Exactly.
we embrace that, and that's where, I'm telling students to embrace it like this now so that they're prepared. Now, in 12 months or a year, I may be having a different conversation with you. But I think, but, and I want to go back to one more thing that we talked about. People have said to me before, hey, man, why do you make students load so much data in a TMS and do it manually? things like that. I'm like, I'm teaching the foundations of data.
Yep.
And as you know very well, and most people that are watching this webinar know, if you have bad data, you're going to have a bad output. And so why not try to figure out how to clean that data, leverage that data, have a master data management strategy on the front end so it doesn't come back to bite you on the back.
Oh, yeah.
And and AI is the same thing. AI is not going to be any good if it's working with bad data. You're going to have a bad outcome.
That is a flawless analogy because I am so passionate about the data aspect of it. I actually thought where you were going to go is AI can be used as that data cleansing tool, which technically, yes, it can. But
Sure.
if you don't know what you're cleansing, it's not going to be very valuable. So that kind of tied into your overall story as well. And you had mentioned prompt engineering. And when we last talked, you talked about how critical just having a competency in prompt engineering is. And after our conversation, I actually sat with myself to think about how am I actually prompting? Because you had mentioned earlier, we're using it like Google.
Yeah.
And I think I'm a bit more advanced, transparently. I'm a bit more advanced where I give context.
Hmm.
Here's all the information I know. Here's my thoughts on this. Here's the exact output that I'm looking for. And even in my initial output, even when I've prompted the AI, I'm still going back and forth with it. I'm trying to make it, give it to me in a language that I understand and my exact, interpretation, making sure that it's an output that I can actually articulate and retain.
Yeah.
So it's very fascinating that um, I had never thought about it the way that you had just said, where prompt engineering is so critical. And I think we still need to hone in and continue to evolve with our understanding of, what is, good prompt engineering and how can we adopt it, regardless if we're in logistics or even everyday life. So,
I think, what's funny is I'm teaching in the master's program. It's a 1 year program and teaching in that and teaching the foundations of supply chain tech. And we're going to focus heavy on AI. And I use AI to help me with my lesson plans. Right. And
yeah,
I'm sitting there saying, I will put in, this is what I'm going to teach. What am I missing? Right. And it'll come back and give me ideas and then I'll formulate things. And so I was just playing around the other day and I thought, how would AI tell me to teach prompt engineering? And so I asked the AI tool. So the first thing you need to do is when you embrace it this way, you need to actually look at it like you're having a conversation with someone
yeah,
and start asking questions and then continue to ask those questions. It's just like if you and I were having an interview right now and you started asking me questions and then I give you an answer and you just keep asking me questions and drilling down. That's what you're doing with this AI, with the Gen AI. You just keep asking questions and saying, I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about that, and getting different perspectives because it's pulling data obviously, and pulling those responses back and giving you ideas to things that you never even thought about. So I just found that very interesting because it was like, hey, if you're going to teach prompt engineering, this is how you should think because this is how I like to be prompted, and I love to answer these questions. And I was blown away.
yeah,
So it kind of helped me skew a couple of lessons that I'm going to teach that way.
yeah. And
And I compared it Chat GPT to Google as well, and I got
did you?
two different answers.
Oh, that's really interesting. I feel as if, especially in the professional setting, in some regards, it's almost taboo. If you use Chat GPT, whereas you and myself, I will be very open that I use AI in my day to day, and I'm not ashamed of that. And the way that I equate this is if I was very proficient in Excel and I used formulas that made my life easier, I would probably brag about it. In fact, I know analysts that do brag about it that are far more skilled than I could. I am using a tool to help me get to my end result in the most efficient and hopefully proficient way possible. So I think it's something that it's nothing to be ashamed of whatsoever, but also it is a skill that I think any professional, regardless of industry, I know I've said that before, we can continue to learn and use in our day to days as opposed to viewing it just completely as this threat.
Several months back, I was very fortunate to sit in a conversation that happened with one of a C-level executive at a very large company, and he was explaining the policy they had on AI adoption, and then how he used AI in his everyday life. And he was giving us examples of how he was using Copilot to basically just become his scheduling assistant for the day. And he goes, I don't need an executive assistant. I can just do this myself. I like to schedule my own meetings. But then you start talking about the approach of how the company uses AI. And it's really about two things. One is a lot of times you'll have a company that'll come in from the top down and they'll say, we're going to use AI and we're going to use it this way.
Mhm.
Or you can go, actually, there's three approaches. The second approach would be from the bottom up, because then it's going to be, hey, this business unit leader or these business analysts or these supply chain analysts have identified an area where we think AI could be utilized, right? And so the business is then going to management and executives saying, we want to leverage AI this way, and they're building a business case for it. Then the third is the hybrid approach where both come to the middle and say, hey, this is a great idea. We're going to roll this out. This is the directive, et cetera. So he was explaining how they do that over the last 6 months. Every executive I talk to in companies, the first thing I say is, hey, what's your stance on AI and how are you guys doing that? Or is it top down? Is it bottom up? It's really interesting to hear how they're doing that. And those approaches have completely changed in the last year.
Absolutely. And this is actually a great segue for me. So, first and foremost, I have to acknowledge we're really honing in on Gen AI. And I think it's because most consumers know what that is. They use that in their day to day. And I think you and I can both agree that when we look at this hype cycle, it's largely driven by Gen AI. So, that's why we're focusing. But my segue that I was referencing is so I come from the technology side, you come from the technology side. And an interesting conversation that I had at a company that I work for, I was in the product management team and we had a customer advisory board. And prior to each customer advisory board event, we would reach out to our members and see if there's specific topics that they would like to discuss. And as one can imagine, for the past 2 years running, it was AI, but there was no specific use case. It was just, what is the strategy for AI? And I understand that, right? Because AI is such a broad term and there's so many different use cases that could be solved by so many different forms of AI that most end consumers don't know, this AI would be best used for this use case, so on and so forth. But my point is, so we as a product team presented our strategy, which was a top-down strategy, regardless of application, just a little tidbit there. But then I got into questions with my customers of, well, what is your strategy? And if we incorporate this into the TMS, can you even use it? Is it something that your organization, we had a multi-tenant SaaS application, and historically, anything we rolled out to our customers went to every customer. They were all on the same version of the code. So this is something that we had to have discussions with our customers to say, do we even have to approach deployment differently? And transparently, the answer should be yes in many regards. But I just found it very interesting that the initial question is always, well, what's the strategy with AI? I think Gen AI, like I said, is largely driving those questions. And then when you start digging into, well, what are the use cases and can you even use it? I think it's still questions that customers need to ask themselves or clients need to ask themselves.
Yeah, no, I agree. And thanks for that example, because I think if if you go back and look at the latest study that everyone's quoting, McKinsey said that 90% of all AI projects fail or have failed, and there's a reason behind that, right? Because normally what happens is there's this big hype cycle that everybody, an executive's going to a conference or someone, a consulting firm, something's happened, right? That's triggered this and said, hey, we're going to go and do this project. But then maybe they don't understand really what the outcome should be from that project, or
Yeah.
they haven't allocated the correct resources, or they have not had the right talent match what they need in the organization in order to pull that off. So I think there's that. The other thing is that, as you pointed out, there's the hype cycle of Gen AI, but now there's agentic AI. And
Yes.
we are seeing, and you're seeing it more than I am, because you're living in this world of advising clients on technology. But everyone is talking about agentic AI and in an application. And again, that's great. I love the fact that we're going there, whether it's
Yeah.
supply chain planning, TMS, WMS, order management systems, global trade, whatever the case may be. What are you trying to do with that technology? And what are you trying to do with that process? And
Yes.
so if you can identify that, and then you can really understand how to map that out, and then go back to your example. If I'm in a TMS and I'm a planner, and I am sitting there and I'm planning shipments, and then all of a sudden I get an alert because a shipment is, going to miss its next pickup or whatever the case may be. Normally, you as a planner would be scrambling, right? You're going to sit there and say, okay, I got to look at this. I got to call this carrier. I got to do all these things. But if I have a process mapped out that allows me to take those exceptions and then use agentic AI behind the scenes to take that, listen for these signals, and then go and call that carrier, book that appointment, and do that for me in the background, I just freed up my time. Or I'm
Exactly.
having the system give me a couple of different options that I can look at and say, hey, these are valid or not. And again, it goes back to that point I made about you need to be the expert in your domain, so that when the solution comes back and says, hey, here's option A or option B, you can pick the right option. And
Yeah.
and if not, then you can train the solution to actually learn, so that the next time it happens, the right options presented, or it's already doing the process in the background for you.
Yes.
So I think that I don't think enough companies are thinking to that level yet. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I completely agree with you. And in fact, I had written a post about how I am frequently seeing, kind of going back to what I saw with the cab. I see clients go to market and they just ask a very broad question, what is the AI strategy? And I always ask them, why are we starting with a label? What is the challenges? What are the challenges that we're looking to solve right now? If it is solved with AI, that's a label that the tech provider should give you, and that's great. And there's many other follow-up questions that you should have to understand, is it scalable, right? Do I have the right resources with the right expertise to actually train? Just as you said, it has to have human in the loop, right? It's not completely autonomous. And I think it will be many years from now before it is. And I think that's where kind of the doom and gloom comes, is what if that day comes? Well, there's always going to be an evolution. There's always something going on, right? So they'll always need human in the loops. And I strongly believe that. But going back to your question of what I am seeing is I'm seeing an influx of agentic AI. In fact, if I have to think back to the past, even I'll say five, just to throw out a number of vendors that I saw, 99%, if not 100%, were only showing agentic AI. And then anything else in relation to AI was conceptual. It was, here's our roadmap, here's our strategy, here's where we want to go, which is fantastic to see. Even for the agentic AI piece, I've seen some very compelling use cases. I have seen one case study that I do think has quantifiable benefits. But I would say, if you are a client and you are interested, you're looking at the tech market saying, how can I read through all the noise? I say, first and foremost, go back to the basics. What are the challenges you're looking to solve for? Ignore the label of AI, right? if if a technology has invested all their money in appointment scheduling AI, and your challenges are largely in planning and optimization, what is the value that you would get out of that? You have
Right.
to ask yourself those questions. But in addition to that, I would also be asking, If vendors are positioning AI as a solution, look for case studies, look for quantifiable value, because at the end of the day, you need to justify your investment. And in order to justify the investment, goes back to you have to understand your operational challenges. What will this technology solve for? And then what is the outputs that the network is seeing when they implement these technologies? And that's label agnostic. Doesn't matter if it's AI or not. So that's my opinion. I'm strong on that stance.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad to hear that, and I agree 100% with you on that. And I think the other thing too is it goes back to the data challenge, right?
Yeah.
And do you have the correct data? What does your data structure look like? What's your master data management strategy looking like? I mean, these would be this. Gosh, Rochelle, if you think about it, these are the same questions we've been asking since 2000. And, when we were, just implementing a TMS, for instance, hey, if you got bad data, you're gonna have a bad output. And so it's the same thing. And I think, um, we're in a massive hype cycle right now with AI. Companies are allocating budgets to AI. If companies aren't talking about it in their 10K and their annual reports, then they're taking a hit because boards are saying, "Hey, what are we going to do to catch the competitor?" A lot of this is marketing fluff potentially, but at the end of the day, I think the winners, in my opinion, will be the ones that do exactly what you said. They've done the analysis, they've worked with a trusted advisor, and they've said, these are the areas we think that we can actually use a solution to enhance, be more productive, and get a competitive advantage.
Yes.
And this is the roadmap to do that. The question is, do you want to be you want to be the pioneer and the bleeding edge, or are you a company that wants to wait and say, I'll do this in 2 years and I'll take this risk off the table?
Yeah.
Or are you, just wherever you're going to be in that cycle. But I think that the ones that can actually solve that and go back to what you said, find that process, find that strategy will have a competitive advantage. I do.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. And I'm going to tack on one thing because we're getting back to just pure fundamentals regardless of AI. You talk about data management. Absolutely agree with you. The other aspect is connectivity in the sense of third parties, so carriers, right? I always argue there's certain technologies, if you don't have that connectivity, you just have a fancy Excel, very, very expensive, fancy Excel, right? That you're using internally. So it's interesting because where I sit today as an advisor, those pure fundamentals have not changed, even though there's been so much advancement in what technology actually is and
Right.
what it's capable of doing. Just going back to the what are the challenges we need to solve? What is the value that you would garnish from this investment? And is it worth it? And label it agnostic, right? So,
Yeah. And I think the big thing, it's with when you're implementing any technology. If I go back a few years back, I worked for one of the large visibility companies, right? The visibility providers. And, we went through a phase right there with COVID and everyone wanted to know where their stuff was, right? So it was a huge hype cycle right then for visibility. Um, and a lot of companies jumped on board and which they should have, but I don't think their strategy was right. And they didn't really understand how to measure the ROI to understand if they got the ROI out of the projects. And you see that across the whole landscape. And I think that's with technology in general. And so it's very important to understand these are the processes. This is the outcome of the business that I want to be. These are the things that I want to be able to do. And this is how I'm going to measure that output and to be able to show I got the return on investment. Or, hey, this really helped me get a competitive advantage in my sector. And so I think if you can lay that out ahead of time and really understand that, that's truly where you're going to get it. And I think that's very important right now with AI.
absolutely. Absolutely. Before we keep, honestly, Thomas, I could just keep going on and on about this, but I don't want to get too far off of topic. So I just want to kind of circle back on everything that we've discussed today, because what we wanted to touch on is from the very beginning. So, how is academia changing
Right.
with the current technological landscape? How are you working with students, which you touched on? And then we also ingested that into how, from a day to day perspective, regardless of what type of professional you are, but especially in the supply chain and logistics space, how do we better incorporate and use AI? And then we also were able to touch on the technology landscape and what are we seeing? I was able to give some insights from my time in technology. What were we seeing from the customer base, but then also how clients should go to market and the questions that they should be asking if their emphasis is AI. I'll hit that again. Ask for case studies. Those are very important. But is there anything else that you wanted to touch on that maybe we didn't get to?
I think if I go back to just go back to where we are right now with, students. Students are eager to learn. They're eager to, they're looking at it, and obviously they're confused a little bit around AI and how do I use AI and what's this going to do? I mean, a lot of students are saying, "Oh my gosh, my," it goes back to what you said, the entry level position coming out of a university now into an organization is definitely going to be different. There's no doubt about that. So again, we're trying to prepare those students and give them the tools to be able to say on day one, that job may look different and it may be because of X, which in this case could be AI. So therefore, you need to go in, and once you're going through that rotational program or whatever that job is, you need to become that knowledge, the master of that area, so that then you can figure out how to embrace that, whether they're using AI or not, or better yet, look for opportunities and go have those conversations with your supervisors. I think the other thing that we're trying, I know I personally am doing is making students still learn the power of collaboration,
Yeah.
and make them continue to work in teams and understand how to use tools that they're given. And most importantly, ask questions.
Yep.
Continue to just ask questions. There's nothing wrong with ever asking a question. And there's nothing wrong with ever saying, I don't know. Let me go research that. That's the key. Just don't say I don't know. I think that's where I would leave it. I think, you know, um, it'll be very interesting to see if we were to have this conversation next year,
Yep.
where where we are in regard to AI adoption. There's going to be a new term that's come out with AI, the next evolution of AI.
Yes.
I asked ChatGPT to tell me that term, and it came back with three different answers. And I'm not going to spoil that. So if you're watching this webinar, I would tell you to go ask ChatGPT or Google or any of the other tools and just say, "Hey, it was Gen AI, it was agentic AI. What's the next evolution of AI, and what's it going to be called?" And
That's
you
exactly
actually
what I'm going
mentioned
to do.
you
I
actually
did.
mentioned it. Yeah, you actually mentioned it, and I don't think you realized you did, but yeah, you did.
Oh, that means if I mentioned it, that means I'm starting to hear about it. So I will, as soon as we're done talking, that's the first thing that I'm doing.
You're going to go and use AI to read the transcript, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate this has been a
Yeah, sure.
fantastic conversation. And I think we should benchmark ourselves to say this is where we were early 2026. What does this look like even end of 2026, early 2027?
Yeah, and I'll lead with this. I'll say, if if you're interested, if you have questions about what we're doing at the university setting, feel free to hit me on LinkedIn. And then if you're just interested in general, hey, what's going on in the world of AI? Obviously, you can reach out to me, but Rochelle would love to talk to you as well. I'm sure. So I'll give
Absolutely.
you a plug as well.
Absolutely. No, I greatly appreciate it. Yes. And if there's any questions, we talked about going to market, what questions you should be asking, especially for TMS and logistics, reach out via LinkedIn, JBF Consulting, our website as well. You can connect us with an advisor like myself, and we can have those discussions
Yeah, great. Well, have a good day. Thank you.
as well. Thank you.